in a focus group in the year 2015, around this time, in fact, in 2015, I sat in a focus group and among Republicans, because we were trying to box Trump out in the Republican primary still. And a woman said, no, Trump can't be corrupted. He's the richest man in the world. He built every building in New York. He's the most powerful person in New York City and in New York and in business anywhere. Everyone. And I was like, the f is this?
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Good night and good luck.
Hey, folks, welcome back to the Lincoln Project podcast. I am your host, as always, Rick Wilson. We are out of the Thanksgiving to Election Day recovery window, and I am joined by my good friend, recent congressional candidate, all-around good thinker about American life and politics and our destiny as a country, John Avlon. As always, John, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me, my friend. How are you doing after the election?
I'm doing all right, brother Rick. I appreciate it. Look, I'm more concerned about the country even than our campaign. I was proud of the race we ran. I think we fought the good fight, and the good fight goes on. And I think a lot of the themes that we talked about, they need to rebuild the middle of our politics, rebuild the middle of our economy, remain really urgent, relevant messages for I think where the country wants to go, and where the Democratic Party needs to go. And because I think a lot of those late-breaking undecideds and independents who ultimately voted for Trump didn't sign up for Project 2025. They didn't sign up for this for us predictable sort of chaos contingent he's trying to put in control. And the pendulum will swing back, but it's going to be a rough time for a few years.
I think that's right. And I think you said something, and you've talked about this a lot. We've talked about this over the years, and you talked about it a lot in the campaign, I think correctly, of rebuilding the middle. There is a perception among a lot of Americans that we are, 50% in a hard right camp and 50% in a hard left camp. And we know that's not true. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about rebuilding that middle, rebuilding that sense that, that the extremes of both parties are not the representative picture of America.
That's not who America is. And that's why I think for a lot of us, the idea that Donald Trump could be reelected after trying to overturn an election on the back of a lie that led to an attack on our Capitol seemed like a moral impossibility. But the fact is that presidential elections in particular are binary choices. We are more tribal than it is healthy for America to be. I've in my history book author hat, I write a lot about how America is the first nation in the world founded on an idea, not a tribal identity, and that's why tribal politics are such a kill shot to our country. But that said, I really do think that the vast majority of Americans are in the middle. There's more than unites, for example, the center left and center right than often they have in common with the extremes of their own parties. And while it is absolutely false to say that the Democratic Party and Republican Party are equally extreme, that is not true on any measure. There is nonetheless a perception among a lot of folks that the Democratic Party is almost as extreme as the Republican Party. And so I think we need to the extent the politics perception, we need to dig into that and deal with it. I think some of the chaos that Trump is about to unleash will remind those independent voters that this is not what they bargained for, but we need to, for the good of the country, right? The larger issue is the strength of our democratic republic. We need to strengthen the middle of our politics again. And that to me means strengthen the middle of our economy again. Until we do that, we're not going to have the ballast to resist these shifts. And that's the larger issue. How do we strengthen American democracy and frankly, strengthen democracy at home and abroad right now? Because the autocrats just got enabled. And that's one of my biggest concerns.
Yeah, I think the global tilt to autocracy should be something that has always traditionally been somewhat offset by the American ideal. And right now, unfortunately, we have, and this speaks to that difference between the two parties. There is no one in the Democratic Party who's out thinking we should establish a left-wing autocracy that would be a great thing for this country. There are people in the Republican Party who believe the MAGA party, whatever you want to call it these days, who believe that Donald Trump should be an all-powerful leader. It's got like strong North Korean Juche vibes about it. Of you know, the president should have basically unbounded autocratic power, which is not the wiring diagram of our Constitution and the founding of this country, which ironically a lot of Republicans say, "Oh, I want to get back to the founding." The founding viewed the presidency in a much different light than modern Democrats or Republicans. But let's,
but let's go down that tributary.
Yeah,
though,
but
for a second,
I do.
right?
I want to chase that rabbit a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, because I think it's directly relevant. I mean, you've got the absurdity of some of the authors of Project 2025, which now the Trump team is admitting was always the agenda after trying to distance themselves from it. That simultaneously say they want to create a super imperial presidency, but also return to a constitutional order. Those two things are not the same.
No.
The founding fathers were very clear, and this goes back to my book on George Washington's farewell address. The number one thing they were concerned about with democracy was the rise of a demagogue who would stir up the mob and rise to power on, quote, the ruins of public liberty. Washington warned in the farewell address, part of the problems with hyperpartisanship, which has been the preoccupation of my entire work as a journalist, historian.
25 years. I mean,
it's a little
God, almost 30 now.
Well, shit, man. I mean, but I mean, this is it. And this is what they warned about. I mean, in the Federalist Papers, they warn about the dangers of a demagogue even more than they do about extolling the virtues of democracy. Washington warned about hyperpartisanship leading to, quote, occasional riots and insurrection. And when I wrote that book, 8 years ago or so, those words didn't hit as hard as they do now. And so you've got this cognitive dissonance, but the founders warned us about this. They warned about the dangers of a demagogue. They warned about the dangers of hyperpartisanship. They warned about foreign interference in domestic politics. All these things are forces that had led to the destruction of democratic republics before. And so we need to listen to them much more acutely and use that to sort of build that broader bipartisan coalition that you and I have been talking about for a while to defend American democracy more urgently than before, but particularly as we head to the 250th anniversary of America's founding. We got to listen to them even more closely now.
We have a moment, I think, where Democrats have to do some soul searching and some resetting, and right now, it strikes me that we've got a moment where Democrats, if they're going to have an intellectually honest discussion about this country, they're going to need to get unstuck from the sort of this ethereal policy-driven thing and get back to talking about what's in people's guts and heart. Where do you see the Democratic Party needs direction and help as we go forward from here?
I think they need to really focus on rebuilding the middle. They need to focus on rebuilding the middle of our economy, rebuilding the middle class. I think folks here recentering, and I think there's a misunderstanding that this is some kind of a cut and paste return to Bill Clinton. Now, I think Bill Clinton has a lot to teach us politically, and Ian Carville will write about it's the economy is stupid, but you can actually work with unions in this environment to strengthen the working class and the middle class, which is the ballast of the American century. And you talk to unions, they'll talk about the need to make sure we are not streamlining our regulatory environment so we can get back to building again, get back in the business of building again. That's something that Biden's not getting a lot of credit for currently, but between the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill, the economy he's handing off to Donald Trump, which is in robust shape, frankly, despite, I think, Democrats should have learned how regressive inflationary policies are.
Right.
And you cannot indulge them again. That part of what it is to recast the center as a rebellious project that's focused on rebuilding the middle in ways that resonate with working folks and strengthen the middle class again, so that affordability is addressed. But that requires getting back in the business of building again. And that means not letting special interests gum up the works constantly, putting aside, I think, the need not to get spun around the axle of every culture war debate that comes down the pike.
Right.
Don't take the bait. Focus on the fundamentals. If you don't get the big things right on the economy, on safety, on security, personal safety, public safety, and economic security, then the other stuff doesn't matter. And so Democrats have to be especially strong when it comes to questions of personal security, economic security, and that includes the border. I think that was a mistake that they should have taken more seriously early on. And I think that's particularly true in places like New York. The center left needs to be, in effect, the reform party, and to take on those frustrations, to stop those folks who are casting protest votes from voting for something that they don't want, which is the chaos and extremism that's going to come from this Trump administration. But that means that, when that ballot initiative passed in California, people wanted to recriminalize low-level crime. Well, no kidding.
Yeah, no joke.
Get those things right.
We talk a lot about the culture wars, but there is a cultural resonance in the minds of folks who are late breakers, who come in, who make their decisions in elections later in the game, who are not people like us who focus on politics a lot. They come in and they want their neighborhoods and their streets and their homes to be safe. It is unfortunately something that can be demagogued very easily by folks like Trump, who is a master of that, and folks on the right who've convinced them that every immigrant to the country is about to kill you. We know that's not true, but it also has been one of the better moments for Harris was when she took a stand on the border that was stronger than Trump's, but there was no follow through on it after that. It didn't sustain as a through line in the campaign. And I think that immigration has been this sort of killer app that the Democrats have been afraid to touch. And the border, it's been a thing that they've been afraid to touch because there's that belief that, oh, well, they're Hispanics, they will vote Democratic. They're our people. We don't want to offend them. And I think that is a major point of vulnerability right now for them in the future, for 26 as well.
Well, Rita Sherritt has talked a lot about this, and over liberal patriot, and I think liberal patriot is a good as good a moniker as any out there for the kind of tradition we need to reassert. But that's right. I think Democrats, for example, have gotten embarrassed to talk about the virtues of assimilation. And I think I think that assimilation is what makes immigration work. First of all, let's be clear: we're a nation of immigrants. I'm the grandson of immigrants. Immigration is America's greatest renewable resource, but it does need to be done the right way, and we need to make sure it's easier to have legal immigration. We need to be tougher on undocumented illegal immigration. That shouldn't be controversial to say, but part of what makes it work is a virtue of assimilation, which, by the way, is a mutual process. Right? Lest we forget. So I think civics education is an important piece of what we need to be striking. When I talk to Hispanic communities, particularly out on the East End, there was a real concern about crime. There one of the conversations I'll never forget happening was with a family of Colombian descent many whose kids were now in law enforcement, and they needed to understand out of the gate that I wasn't one of those defund the police Democrats. Right. That's brand damage, despite the fact that Republicans actually voted to defund the police when they voted to cut the funding for the FBI. Right. Just 6%, putting aside the current absurd suggestion of appointing Kash Patel, and we'll see whether look, we laugh about it, but we got to see. I'd like to think that there'll be enough Republicans in the Senate who don't constitutionally self-neuter, and at least when it comes on issues of national security and law and order, don't screw around with these revenge bender appointments Trump's putting forward.
I want to talk to you about that for a second, because we are seeing on the left, there's this sort of despair right now. He can't be beaten. We can't resist him. He always wins in the end. And I disagree with that fundamentally. The first term showed us he lost battles over and over again. He's good as an outsider in the electoral space, but I feel like the portfolio of people he's put forward for his cabinet and for senior positions has been so subpar and so below the threshold that that line from Emerson about Lincoln's cabinet, he called it. He said the presidency was the lengthened shadow of one man, and I think the shadow that Trump is casting here, these people they're chaos monkeys. They're crazy people. How do you think that's going to be received? Not only in the Senate, which I think some of them will go through Rubio, et cetera, but by the American people, because these are folks that are not qualified to run a Waffle House by and large.
Right. And look, I think that we put Rubio aside, right? I mean, remember not that long ago, people like Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg gotten, 99, 98% of the votes in the Senate, because the idea wasn't you had to agree with them. It's where they qualified. And I would like to think that the Senate, recognizing that Trump is definitionally a one-termer, And look, the mere fact that John Thune won the secret ballot to be next head of the Republican Party versus Rick Scott shows that enough of them will at least care on the issues of national security. Well, they'll think that experience and qualifications matter rather than just having, a sycophant in control. But this is the dark carnival that you and I warned about. Now, down the stretch, and this is one of the things I'd like to get your take on, is that enough independent voters and late-breaking undecideds seem to have amnesia about this core aspect of Trump. They didn't focus on his desire to publicly execute Liz Cheney down the stretch, or any of these other things that, the fact that he tried to overturn an election on the back of a lie that led to an attack on our Capitol. And instead they focused on, probably some strength versus weak access and border and other issues. But they're getting all of it. They're getting Project 2025, which, every polling I saw, was less popular than lice. So let's take a look at those independent voters who swung towards him this time aren't going to, they didn't, want Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth in charge of, DOD and the FBI, Tulsi Gabbard, DNI.
Right.
That becomes one of the big tests. And so I think that will fuel a pendulum swing back in 2 years, although you don't want to just, an enormous amount of damage can and will be done in that time.
Yeah. I don't want to take for granted that people will see that they're a bunch of fuck ups immediately, because some of these things take a minute to percolate through the system. I think the thing that's going to probably hurt those independents, a lot of them, as we're seeing now, they were making an economic choice again. They thought it was, at least. It's fallacious, but that was what we've been grinding through the polling numbers for 3 or 4 weeks now in the background here, and a lot of them really were moved as much by the inflation argument as anything else in the field. And they thought all this inflation has come from Joe Biden personally. He's the one who caused this. And so we're going to punish him. And because Trump is a businessman, I know, but it's that's the absurd and the fallacious belief that Trump is a businessman, which has haunted me since 2015. And I'll tell you a quick aside. In a focus group in the year 2015, around this time, in fact, in 2015, I sat in a focus group and among Republicans, because we were trying to box Trump out in the Republican primary still, and a woman said, no, Trump can't be corrupted. He's the richest man in the world. He built every building in New York. He's the most powerful person in New York City and in New York and in business anywhere. Everyone. And I was like, the fuck is this? Yeah. And we had the moderator say, here are the real facts about this. And in this room of Republicans, they were like, no, I don't believe you. He's a businessman. He's a businessman. He's a businessman. Yeah. And that's had a weirdly persistent mojo for that guy.
Well, this is where politics is downstream from culture, and this is to some extent a mirror of who we are. The reality TV image that he cultivated over decades is stuck in people's minds in a way that facts can't compete with. I'll tell you a quick story you'll appreciate. I don't know if I've told you this one before. So I was talking to a friend of mine, lives North Haven. An artist. And a couple days after the 2016 election, he was getting some concrete poured. And the guy came up and he said, I was running late because of traffic. And he said, but that traffic, that won't be a problem after January 20th. Like somehow Trump was going to solve like traffic on the East End on Long Island, right? Which is, okay. Anyway, so this guy started asking, so, well, tell me a little bit about, you pour concrete, you must have done some work with, President-elect Trump. He said, I sure did. Worked on 2 of his buildings. The guy couldn't help but asking, saying, well, did he pay you? Because, Trump doesn't pay his contractors.
Notoriously. Right.
And the guy said, kind of hesitated a bit. And he said, well, no, as a matter of fact, after we did the work, he came back to us and said he'd pay us pennies on the dollar. And his emissary, was whatever the dude they were dealing with said, look, you got a choice. You can take this deal or we'll take you to court and we'll be able to outlast you. And you may get bankrupt in the process, or you can just take this and move on and have the virtue of knowing that you've worked for Donald Trump, right? In lieu of payment, right? So
Right.
the guy told the story, which is just horrific, screwing over,
Yep.
working men, and Eric, sorry, and this guy said to him, he said, well, so if you had that terrible experience with him, why'd you vote for him? And the guy looked at him and said, because he's a good businessman.
Amazing.
And it's one of those
Amazing.
stories that just kind of it sums it all up. But look, we're here where we are. One of the questions I'd just, as you're digging into the data,
Yeah.
what do you attribute late breaking undecideds going for Trump for, knowing that maybe they're not regular voters, but they'd seen all the chaos and frank, attempt to assault our democracy, and they decided at the last minute, nah, I'll go with this because a lot of the polling and modeling suggests it would break the other way. So how do you understand that momentum? Was it algorithm? What was it?
There was a lot of stuff going on in the social media space that was driving some of these late breakers. They were coming into it. We are now seeing some data, particularly in that breakover of Hispanic and African-American men, because she was a black woman. It's not racism as much as sort of a patriarchal thing in those two cultures that they like the tough Trump. They like the manly, for all that it's fake and all that it's, garbage. They like that. They and a lot of those African-American and Hispanic men, sorry, my friends in the Democratic Party, they don't identify as Democrats. They think of Democrats as women, gays, and academics in those communities. And that's something that Republicans have stolen a march on the Democratic Party in a way that is dark and brilliant in its evil sophistication, how they've done it. But they've told them, like, oh, you don't have to vote for a woman. Besides, she's the same kind of person who yells at you. She's like your first wife. It's an ugly sort of under the radar thing. Now, with a lot of white independents that are out there, they were late breakers. They were lower propensity independent voters. And Trump's name ID caused a massive crush on this thing. As much as we all thought everyone knows Kamala Harris, she still ended the race with lower name ID by about 20 points than Trump. Even
20 points?
It's 17.9 was one of the numbers that my guys popped up. That is a really among folks who said they voted on election day, to qualify that a little bit, but those are definitional late breakers. If you voted on election day, you are probably a late breaker or a hard five, a super voter. But that name ID function of Trump, the businessman idea, combined with the economic stuff, combined with the racial and sex stuff, it all added up into this sort of weird mix that it was undercounted in every single public and private survey. I mean, and nobody had it on the radar screen that the scope of the flip of independent at the last, those late deciding independents, no one had it in their polling. It was nowhere to be found.
Well, look, one thing I will say, there was a lot of conversation about how abortion was the killer app, and then, and then we clearly was not. And there were a lot of folks who said this is the play Democrats reflexively run. Now, maybe this time it's different because we're seeing the downstream effect of the overturning of Dobbs, the Dobbs dads, and all that. But I mean, I remember calling a mutual friend of ours when I was watching the World Series. The Yankees were in the World Series. No, I'm not over Game 5, fifth inning yet. Nope, not yet. Not even a little bit. Although I'm very happy about the Bills last night.
You're not giving that one up
yet? Nope. But I do have the consolation of the Bills crushing the 49ers last night. And I was like, how come he's taking out these anti-trans ads on in the World Series in New York broadcast? Incredibly expensive. And there was a sense, it was just a waste of money. It was a flex for the donor class. Well, no.
It turned out that was a very powerful, I always joke that culture wars are the side that overreaches on the culture war is the side that loses. And that was wrong this year because that was an overreach on the culture war and they won with it. And I think, you can go back, and I won't necessarily qualify it just as independents, but a lot of non-college white men, African American men, and Hispanic men got those trans ads beaten into their brains. Over 30,000 reps on those ads during a lot of sporting events and all over their social feeds for 5-6 months. And the U.S. Senate campaigns for Republicans were running the same kind of ad, tying their Democratic opponents to that issue. And late breaking, day late and a dollar short, that we were pushing out a piece that was trying to, like, this was Trump's policy. Originally didn't work, didn't have traction, just didn't have the throw weight to counteract against probably $60 million of spending on that ad. It was
77.
Oh, it's 77. Okay, yeah. It is. You can't often say that a certain ad was a game changer in an election. You really don't frequently get that. Daisy, Willie, and that. Willie Horton and that, or three in a presidential race, you can say were decisively impactful, and had a cultural hook in this one that Democrats do not want to look at. They did not want to face it. And I talked to somebody who tested our ad, and they said it works. The ad drives numbers. It's the right thing to do. But
this is the response.
Yeah, but my response that we did at Lincoln. But the response from the Democratic world was like, well, this will cause static and dissension inside. We'll get blowback inside our coalition on this.
Yeah,
and it reminds me of that old line that Bobby Goodman used to say. He goes, you're going to feel like a scumbag if you run these negative ads. The question is, do you want to be the honorable scumbag on election day? And they should have wanted to be the honorable scumbag on election day and take the heat from the internal fight and say, fuck it, we're moving forward on this. But we ended up in a very different space.
Yeah, there's an issue of fairness that I think the Democrats need to get their head around. Hakeem Jeffries said, I agree, but I think he could say it louder. Democrats need to get right on the 4 Fs, focus on the 4 Fs, the flag, faith, freedom, which they did a good job on abortion, taking back the issue of freedom, better, right? Freedom, fundamental American value, but also fairness. And here's where I think things get a little bit tricky and why you can't get spun around the axle with this stuff. A lot of times the arguments I would hear from folks just knocking on doors, talking to them in diners, is their anger at the stickiness of the migrants getting the debit cards. It wasn't bigotry and racism as much as it was, that's not fair. Why are they getting taxpayer dollars? Now, there are a lot of practical reasons, but they don't wash in the face of the unfairness of it, especially for folks who are feeling the middle class squeeze. They're not getting the direct help from the federal government. These folks are. That's unfair. Same thing I would say with the, taxpayers paying for surgeries in prison, right? It just struck most people as like not common sense, not fair. And you could counter and say, look, this whole demonization of an incredibly small, marginalized, vulnerable community with a high suicide rate is cruel. And it is irrelevant to our daily lives. But there's a side where, this is where I think Democrats need to stand up for liberal values consistently, stand up to illiberalism wherever they find it, and work into that should be, but also think about fairness from other folks' perspectives. Even in Hispanic, communities I've talked to, there was a sense that, if borders weren't being adequately enforced, that it wasn't fair. That reminds me of another debate in Florida, and I'll remind people that Florida is less safe than New York.
Yes, by far.
By far. All right, so let's just establish that. That in I forget what cycle it was, might have been 20, where there was Trump's team was trying to make a big deal of of associating Democrats on Spanish language radio with socialists, like with the Maduros and Chavez. First of all, Trump sold out Juan Guaido, the Venezuelan opposition leader, after a conversation with Vladimir Putin.
Yep.
Right. Biden administration actually had a pretty good record being strong against Ortega in particular. But there was a conversation about taking that on in 2020, and there was some pushback saying, and I reported this out at the time, saying, "Oh well, but we don't want the socialist community to get angry with us." It was like,
correct.
I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah,
Like, just stand up for liberal values consistently.
Yeah,
Stand up against dictators.
what are you going to get? Like an ugly tweet from Noam Chomsky? I mean, come on.
Right. So this is where there is the opportunity to be stronger on national security. And here's where I do to circle back that Republicans in the Senate actually take seriously. I wonder if the fact that Aleppo, the Syrian rebels are playing offense in Aleppo, whether that brings more scrutiny to Tulsi Gabbard's position of
her
with
pro-Assad position. Yeah, I mean,
We'll see.
I think that the world often collides with reality. The world they want to build often collides with reality, and I think we're going to see that domestically and in foreign policy because there's a great wistfulness in Trump world for a culture and a world that looks autocratic. And they may be losing one of the key autocratic models here because this collapse in Syria, if they're in Aleppo, you've got who's getting hurt by that? Yes, the Syrian, the Assad regime, but also Vladimir Putin, also the Iranians, also this sort of like new axis of assholes of the Iranian, Russian, Chinese, pro-autocratic side of the equation. It may collide with their anticipation of things, of how they're going to go. Well, John Avlon, I appreciate you, brother, as always, coming on the show.
Brother, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I'll talk to you before Christmas, and we will have we'll have more of these in the future, and let's keep up the fight, everybody.
The good fight goes on.
Yes, sir, it does. Folks, I want to thank you all for listening to the Lincoln Project podcast today. You can find out more about us at lincolnproject.us. We are here all the time, and we will have some great content coming up. We're going to talk, yes, to folks with great insights like John going forward. We're also going to be talking about how you mount what I think of as an effective resistance to Trump, more and more as we go into this next year. And it's going to be an important conversation. We hope you'll join us here on the Lincoln Project podcast. Thanks, everybody.